Okay, this video is going to be about the Futaba 14SG and how to configure it to work with the Naza-M V2, and the instruction that you'll see here will probably work with the Naza Lite as well. This video is not going to be how to install the Naza flight controller in your multi-rotor. It is not going to be how to configure it for your likings or to tune it with the gains, etc. It is only going to be how to configure the 14SG to communicate properly with the Naza flight controller and nothing more. Now we're going to configure the 14SG in order to work with the Naza flight controller on a hexacopter. The hexacopter does have a primary flight camera and then also a recording camera that's on a 2-axis gimbal. It's a GoPro 4. So we have the ability to switch between the multiple cameras from our radio. So what we'll do is we're Mode 2 in the United States, so this is going to work the throttle, and this is going to work the rudder, this is going to work the elevator, and this is going to work the ailerons, and SE is a 3-position switch on the top left. It's going to work the mode. In this position it's going to be GPS, and then attitude in the center, and then manual when it's pulled all the way forward. SG is going to work the IOC control. All the way back is going to be IOC off, and then home and course lock. Now we'll also configure SF, which is a 2-position switch, and it's easy to grab with your pointer finger as you're flying. It's large, so we're going to configure this to be a return to home or to manually kick in a failsafe. Now we will configure our SB switch to select between all the way up is going to be our FPV camera or our onboard camera, and then all the way down is going to be our GoPro camera that's on the gimbal. Now we'll also configure the LD knob to change X1, which we configure for various things, but we're going to go ahead and set it up to tune some gains. We're not going to go over how to tune gains on your Naza, but I will show you how to connect this knob to the gain setting. Now this video is not going to be how to use your Futaba 14SG. It is going to be how to configure it with the Naza. I assume that you know how to use your 14SG. But just as a quick little demonstration of what we have here, and we're going to be using the controls, right here is an exit button that we're going to use in order to get out of menu items. And then over here is a touch sensitive jog dial with a return button in the center, and it has 4 quadrants around it that perform different actions when they're double tapped. Our link menu, our model menu, S1, which is a user menu, and system menu, and then of course return in the middle. And these are going to be the only real functions or buttons that we utilize on the 14SG in order to configure it with the Naza. Now the first thing that we do in order to create a new model is we turn the radio on, and we will go over and select the current model name and press return on it, and this will move us to the model select screen, which also gives us the ability to create a new model. And I pressed return on it, and here execute return for 1 second. That's a press and hold, and we have a new model. Now my type defaulted to multi-rotor because that's the last type that I set up, but you know, yours might be airplane. If that's the case, then select the type, press return, and move until you see multi-rotor. Then go on up to the next, and the mode that we're going to be using is going to be a fast multi. We have I think it's a 7003 SB receiver on the hexacopter. So I'm going to go ahead and select this, And now we're up and going with our new model. Now from this point, there's more configuration that needs to be done in order to get the multi-rotor up and going, obviously. If you notice, the blue light, the red and blue light are on. So this is transmitter power to power the actual unit, and this is the RF. So RF is on, and we're wasting a little bit more power here than necessary. What I'd like to do is, since we're going to be working with the radio for some time without actually utilizing the RF module or the receiver, I like to turn the radio off. Press and hold your return button and turn the radio on. And you'll see that we now have a power mode. And you can select RF off using your jog dial and pressing return. And now we are here configuring and working with the system without it actually transmitting anything. You'll notice that the red light is on, meaning that the transmitter has power, but the blue light is off. There is no RF output right now. And that just makes the radio consume a little bit less power while you're doing the configuration. So we're up and running now with our new model. You'll see it has a nice multi-rotor icon with it. And it is named New 1. We don't really want that. It'd be pretty hard to determine what different models are named New 1, New 2, New 3, etc. So let's go in here and select New 1 and select Rename and give our model a more meaningful name. This is a Terra 680 Pro, and I'm just going to go ahead and name it 680 for the brevity of the movie. Remember to press Enter. If you just exit out of this, it won't save the model name. Okay, now that we have everything named, before we get into the actual software, we can go in and configure the functions of the 14SG. And the function menu is accessed by double tapping the link and scrolling down to the function menu. Now what the function menu does for us is it tells us what functions on the radio are output to what channel. The Futaba defaults to the standard aileron, elevator, throttle, and rudder for channels 1 through 4, which are all correct for the Naza flight controller. Now you can scroll all the way through these menus to get down to the next page. You'll see here we have page 104, but you can also just press the S1 to do a page down and to go to the very next page. So channels 1 through 4 was okay with the setup, but channel 5 is set for mode, which is incorrect. Channel 5 should actually be channel 7 for the Naza. So we can come here to this 5 and simply change it to 7. And there's a little problem I have sometimes with the jog dial. My return does not function immediately. Okay, now back to channel 5. Channel 5 should be X1, which we're going to link to the LD dial to do PID tuning. And there is no tune menu option here. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the X1 to actually be named Auxiliary 1, and that will be our function name. And the control that we're going to select is LD, our left dial, or left knob. And then channel 6 is going to be our X2, which is going to control our IOC. Again, there is no function named IOC, so we're simply going to give it the name Auxiliary 2. And that is going to be operated by our SG switch. Now, with the channel 8, we're not going to utilize it, and what I like to do is set it to a function that is not used. In this case, we're not going to use Auxiliary 6, and I place it at Auxiliary 6. Now we're not going to use auxiliary 3, 4, or 5, but maybe in the future I expand it, and I would like to use 3, 4, and 5. Auxiliary 6 would be the last function that I would expand into, so I generally pick auxiliary 6 for my unused function. And then likewise, we'll go down to channels 11 and channels 12. Those are not going to be used. I'll set those to auxiliary 6. And our digital channel 1 and 2, that can either be an on-off state. We are going to set it to no control. And before we leave here, our channels 9 is going to be a camera selection. And you'll see here we have camera record, camera pan, camera tilt. We do not have a camera selection, so there again I am simply going to use one of the auxiliary functions and call it auxiliary 3. And that control is going to be our SB switch. And then channel 10 is going to be our tilt, and there is a function for that. It's called camera tilt. Now that tilt function does not give you any special ability with this multi-rotor programming, but it does give it a name that's memorable. Now our tilt is automatically set up for our right slider, and that's fine for me. So we'll leave it as is. Okay, now I bound the transmitter with the receiver, and that is not something we're going to go over in this tutorial. Again, it's just a how to set up your 14SG with the Naza flight controller. You can read the Futaba manuals about how to bind the receiver. I did choose the wrong mode initially, and for this receiver we're going to use the fastest 14 single channel mode. So we're now linked up with the Naza flight controller. Now, since this Naza flight controller has been configured previously, I am going to go to the tools and I'm going to export my parameters so that I can simply restore this after the tutorial. And then I'm going to restore default settings on the Naza flight controller. And that way we can be all set up with a brand new flight controller to give a good tutorial. So the first thing that we'll do is go to the Basic tab and choose the RC tab. And again, this is configuring the radio. This wouldn't be the very first thing you do if you've just installed your Naza flight controller. But we are only going to go over the RC portions of it. Now, I am not using individual PWM channels. If you were, then you would select the traditional receiver type. I am using the Futaba S-Bus, which here in the selection you would want to select D-Bus. Now the first thing you want to do is come down here and do a stick calibration. We'll move all of our sticks in all the different directions. And I'm not certain if it matters, but I like to move my other controls that will be mapped to the Naza as well, such as my X1, the Mode, and the IOC. And we'll get a good sample here. And we'll click Finish. And it wants us to put the sticks in the center positions and make certain that the ticks are green. So let's go ahead and do that with the throttle as well. And there our throttle is in the center point. Now the throttle right now is centered, and the Naza thinks it's centered as well. So one thing I like to do is create a stick alarm in the Futaba, and what that will do for us is a beep whenever a given stick, in our case the throttle, is in a given position, in our case centered. So to do that, we go to the link menu and go to the next page, and you'll see STK alarm or stick alarm. We'll select that, and it is currently inhibited. We're going to activate it, and we want it activated all the time, so we won't set a switch. And our stick, since we're mode 2, is going to be J3 for the throttle, and we'll come down to the position and go ahead and push and hold return. And now it is set to the exact position that Naza thinks is the center as well. So if we go out of here, you should hear, whenever we got to the center point, the Futaba beep. And when we left the center point, here we go back up the center, and there it beeps. So that gives us an auditory feedback when we might not necessarily be looking at our transmitter. Now the next thing we need to do is make certain that all of the channels are moving in the proper direction. And to start off with the aileron, if we move the aileron left, the tick should go left on the Naza software as well, which is the case. Now if we pull the elevator back, the tick should go to the left, and it does not. It goes to the right. So this channel needs to be reversed. Now you can go to the software and select this button. It currently says norm. You select it, and now the channel will be reversed. You pull back on the elevator stick, and the tick goes to the left like it should. However, I don't like to do it in the software. I like to do it in the radio because sometimes my dials or my mode switches, etc., need to be reversed as well, and the Naza software does not give you that ability. So if you use the normal and reverse buttons in the Naza software for your primary 4 channels, you may then need to go to the radio to reverse your mode switches or knobs, and then you have channel reversing half in software and half in your radio. So I like to just leave it as normal in the software and do all of my reversing in the radio itself so that everything is together. Now to do that, we'll go into the link menu and go down to the reverse submenu. And we know our elevator needs to be reversed, so we'll put that on REV, and we'll check it. Now when I pull back, the tick goes to the left. Now the throttle, you can already tell my throttle is all the way down, and in the Naza software, the tick is all the way to the right, or all the way to its maximum, it's full. So throttle needs reversed as well. And now the throttle operates properly. There's full throttle, and there's no throttle. Now if I move my rudder to the left, the tick should go to the left. So the rudder is okay as well. Now we'll get into the IOC switch later, but if we look right here at our LD dial, our LD, which is linked to channel 5, and it's also X1 or auxiliary 1 in our radio, is backwards. When I move the LD dial all the way down, the X1 tick is all the way to the right, or full. So we'll come down to our aux1 and reverse that. And now our X1 channel is working properly. There it is, the knob is all the way to the full, or to the right, and it is all the way off, or to the left. Now our control mode switch also seems to be backwards. I like it to where all of my switches are in the full back position or the full up position to be the default flight mode. And in this case, the control mode switch tick is all the way to the right, which is failsafe, but once we configure it properly, it will be manual mode. This is opposite of what I want. If I pull the SE switch all the way towards me, it goes toward the GPS side, albeit in failsafe right now, but toward GPS. So this channel needs to be flipped as well, and that is channel 7 also named Mode. So now my switch is all the way back and it's in Failsafe, but it's close to GPS. We'll fix that in just a second. Now, in order to configure the control mode switch so that it functions properly when it's in the full back position, it's actually on GPS. And you'll notice when it's in the center position, it's on attitude, it works properly now. And in the full forward position, it should be on manual, not failsafe. So to correct that, what we'll do is we'll exit from the reverse menu and we'll go to the endpoint menu. And we're working on channel 7, which is the mode function. So we'll hit page down. You can do that by hitting S1, and we'll come down to the mode. And we're going to go ahead and adjust the endpoint of the channel 7 on the left side of the control mode switch, and we're going to select right here and decrease this until the tick is centered underneath the GPS label and the GPS label turns blue. So in this example, that number winds up being 78. It may be different on your transmitter. The important part is that the tick is centered underneath the GPS and it is blue, indicating that the Naza thinks it's in GPS mode. Now, when we move it to attitude mode or center on the SE switch, it's already centered underneath attitude. And we'll pull it all the way forward, and now we'll come over to this setting and we'll again back off the endpoint until the tick moves underneath the manual and is centered there, and the manual turns blue and the Naza flight controller thinks it's manual, which in this case is 77. To make things nice and round, 78 works as well. So now, if we push our switch all the way forward, which is the default configuration for how I start the radio up, we're in GPS mode. SE in the center is attitude, and SE all the way forward, or pulled closest to me, is in manual mode. Now, before we leave the control mode switch, we do want to configure the SF switch to activate failsafe regardless of what mode we may be in, GPS, attitude, manual. To do that, we're going to exit the endpoint menu, and we're going to go and create a program mix by double-clicking the model, and we'll scroll down to program mix, and you'll see we have 5 available mixes. All of them unused. We're just going to choose the very first one. And the first thing I do in a program mix is go to the next page by pressing the S1 and configure it to say when this mix is actually active or not. And here it's inhibited. We're going to go ahead and make it active. But we're going to make it active dependent upon a switch. So we'll select SF, and you'll see that the active is now off because the SF switch is in the full back position. So if I go ahead and pull the SF switch toward me, this particular program mix is now enabled. Now we come down, and the master channel that we're going to be working with is mode, and we're also going to set mode as the slave. Now we can go back to the page 1, and what we're going to do is we're going to adjust the Y offset here in order to make the control mode switch indicator in the Naza software move to failsafe. So in order to do that, we need to activate this program mix. So I'm going to pull the SF switch all the way toward me, and then I'm going to adjust this number while looking at the Naza software, and I'm going to center the tick underneath the failsafe indicator. And failsafe is currently selected as blue, and the tick is underneath the center of failsafe, and also in the status bar on the bottom left, the Naza says Mode Failsafe. So it looks like -51 works in this case. Now let's just double check. If we move our mode switch from GPS to attitude, leaving SF pulled all the way forward, it now says failsafe. It did switch failsafes over to the one after attitude, so that's good. Now if we go ahead and pull it again forward and go all the way to manual mode, it indicates failsafe as well. Now let's make certain we didn't mess up our mode switch in general, so let's take failsafe off, and now it moves over to the manual mode, and in the center position on SE it's attitude, and in the full back it is GPS mode. So we now have a single selection for failsafe regardless of what flight mode we're in. Now, we did configure our LD dial with the thoughts that it is going to be working the gain. So to set that up, we configured LD to be on channel 5, which is X1 on the Naza flight software. So you come over to the basic gain tag, and you can then select the remote adjust and select inhibit or X1 or X2. So we're going to go ahead and select X1 just for this demonstration on the pitch and roll. So in this case, adjusting LD would then change the pitch and roll basic gains. Now we configured X2 to control our IOC via the SG switch. You could have configured the channel 6, which is X2, instead of a switch. You could have linked it to the RD or the right dial, and then utilized the right dial to maybe change the yaw or the vertical basic gain, or you could have made it change the attitude gain of your pitch and roll. So it's up to you how you want to configure that to begin with. For this demonstration, I configured the X2 to be IOC control. And I know what my gains are for this particular model, so I'm going to go ahead and set these remote gains back to inhibit. Now the last thing we want to do is configure our IOC. To do that, you go to the Advanced area and then the IOC tab. And again, when my switches are in the full back position or full up, I want it to be the default flight mode. And you'll see here that in this configuration, the intelligent orientation control is set to home lock. That is not what I want. I want it to be off. Whenever I take off, I want to be in GPS mode with no IOC, or the IOC off. So that means that our channel 6, or X2, or auxiliary 2, needs to be reversed. So to do that, we go into the link menu and go to the reverse submenu, and that is auxiliary 2, or channel 6, and we're going to reverse that. So now my SG switch is in the all the way back position, or the furthest away from me, and my IOC is off. I center it, and it's in course lock. I pull it all the way toward me, and it is in the home lock. Course lock and off. Now one thing we did with the mode switch was that we centered the tick underneath the actual name. And I don't think it's required for the IOC. The Naza understands what these flight modes are already. But I like to go ahead and do that myself. And we can do that the same way that we did the control mode switch. We can go to the Endpoint Adjustment, and we're going to be adjusting the endpoints of channel 6, or aux2, and we can simply rotate the endpoint to be centered underneath the off label. And then our course lock is unaffected, it's in the center. And pull SG all the way toward me, and we will then adjust this value and bring it down to where it's centered around home lock, which is right about there, but 84 works as well. Have consistent numbers here. So now we double check. There our course lock is off in the full back position. Centered is course lock, and pulled towards us is home lock. Now one more thing I like to do is configure the timers. And if we exit out of these menus, we have here multiple timers. We have T1 and T2. What I like to do is configure T1 to be how much time I actually have the throttle on. And then T2 to be how much time has passed since the first time I activated the throttle. So it's a running tally. Now to do that with T1, we go into T1 and we change it to a down. Oops, not hour, down. And my 680 Pro will fly for about 22 minutes. So I'm going to set this to be 20 minutes. And the start condition is going to be J3. And I will go into the on-off here and move my throttle up just a little bit, and then press the set. And you'll see whenever the throttle is in any of this area, the timer will be off, and when it's in this area, it's on. That's backwards for what we want. So we'll change this to reversed. And now when it's in this area, it's off, and here it's on. I'm going to go ahead and back that throttle down just a little bit and go up and set it again. Okay, so now if we go back out to our main screen, if we move the throttle up, you'll see the timer counting down. We can drop the throttle and the timer stops. So what we do now with T2 is we want this to be a count up timer with no alarm, or maybe you want to set that for 30 minutes. No matter what, after 30 minutes, the first time you activated the throttle, you want to be notified. For me, I leave it off. And we're going to do the same thing with a start. Choose J3 and come in, move that up a little bit, set it, and we're going to reverse this. So now it will be turned on, and we can see that function. We go up, both timers are counting. We go down, now both timers stop. That's not what we want for T2. So what we'll do is we'll go back into T2 and we'll configure a stop condition. And we'll choose J3. And what I found here is if you just keep the throttle all the way down and you set, you press a set, and we're going to configure the whole thing, the whole range is off, but we're going to go ahead and reverse this. We should now see whenever we give it throttle and we bring it back down, the stop condition never actually occurs, so that timer continuously goes. Now if we do want to reset these timers, you can come and press the return button and hold it on the given timer that you want to reset. And that's how you configure a Futaba 14SG to work on the Naza flight controller. The instructions here would work for the Naza-M V2 and probably the Naza Lite as well. And we configured the radio to not only remotely adjust gains, work with IOC, change your modes, a single-click failsafe, We set up timers, but we also configured the radio to work with our tilt control, which is the right slider, and also a camera selection, which is the SB switch. If you have any questions, go ahead and post a comment below, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that I can. Thanks for watching.